Hello, my name is Scheiblecker. I work for the IMF's Pacific Financial Technical Assistance Center, and I will explain the SDG indicators 1711, 1712 and 1732. All three indicators are economically related indicators. The SDG indicator 1711 is about total government revenue as a proportion of GDP by source. The SDG indicator 1712 is about the proportion of domestic budget funded by domestic taxes, and SDG indicator 1732 is about volumes of remittances in US dollar as a proportion of total GDP. Let's start with the first indicator, total government revenue as a proportion of GDP. I will explain what is the total government, furthermore what is revenue according to these rules, and by source, which different sources we have. I will not explain what is GDP, it's a too complex system, and this is anyway available for all countries. For the indicator 1712, which is the proportion of domestic budget funded by domestic taxes, I will explain what is the domestic budget and what are domestic taxes. The motivation is here that these indicators try to shed light on how able a government is to cover their expenditures by own taxes. And indicator 1732 is volume of remittances in US dollars as a proportion of GDP. Here I will explain what are remittances, and again I will not explain what is GDP. Let's start right with the definition of the government sector, which was mentioned in the first goal, total government revenue. First we need to know what is total government according to this. So total government according to the classification of the system of national accounts, which is its economically framework developed by the UN, says the total economy consists of 5 sectors. One is non-financial corporations, so these are all the enterprises we know, like producing some commodity, like producing beer or something. Then the second is financial corporation. These are all companies which are insurances or which are banks. They have a separate sector because this is a very vital part of the economy which has to be observed separately. Then private households, non-profit institutions, service households, and the general government, what we are interested in. Let us first come to the corporations, then we can differ quite exactly what is government and what is not government if I explain a little bit on these different other sectors. Corporations are either classified, as I already said, in non-financial corporation or financial corporations, and they can be controlled by government or private sector. We have public corporation, for instance, in non-financial corporations, which are government industries like electricity production in some countries or water. Or we have also public financial corporations, which are government banks or insurances. And then we have the vast majority of private corporations. Let's come now to the institutional sector of the general government, which is the one which we are interested in. This executes its political responsibilities and functions as economic regulation, and it fulfills the function of government as the primary activity. It is responsible for the provision of goods and services to the community or individual households primarily on a non-market basis. Yes, this is, for instance, sewerage is a typical task of a government, part of health service, part of education, then also security, police, for instance, and military service. Furthermore, it doesn't only produce, it redistributes income and wealth by means of transfers, takes from the richer man, ones and transfer to the poorer ones, or takes from the active ones and gives it to pensions. They engage primarily in non-market production, and they finance their activities primarily out of taxation or other compulsory transfers. Included here in this sector are all units of the central state, the central government, the state government and the local government, for instance communities, and social security funds imposed and controlled by these units. Furthermore, all non-market, non-profit institutions that are controlled by the government. Yes? So, institutional sector of the economies which are missing is still the household sector and the non-profit institutions serving households. Household sector is clear, I do not want to explain this. These are private households, families in their homes, for instance. And the last sector is non-profit institutions serving households. What is this? They consist of non-market producers which are not controlled by the government. So they are non-market producers and not controlled by government, which are, for instance, churches. Churches are a private association, not controlled by the government, but producing non-market activities. Churches do not sell their products on the market. They get some other funds, they get some contribution, but this is not a market seller. Yes, here we have also not only churches, but also trade unions, political parties, religious societies, social and cultural and recreational clubs, sports clubs, charities, for instance. So these all form up the non-profit institutions serving households. Let's sum up this in the table. We have here the 5 sectors of the industry: the general government, consisting of the central government, the state government and the local governments, and eventual social security. We come to this later. Then we have non-financial corporations. There we have to distinguish between public corporations and private corporations. The same for financial corporations, public and private ones. Yes? And even the publics form not part of the general government. Yes? They are public, but not general government. General government is only central government, state government and local government and social security. And then we have here household and non-private institutions, but we do not put our focus on them now. Here we have in another graph how the public sector can be split up. On the left-hand side we see general government, again formed by central government, state government and local government, and public corporation. There we have financial and non-financial corporation. For instance, a central bank, it's not really government, it's part of the public sector. It's not general government, it's part of the public sector, and we have other organizations here. Let's focus more now on the general government. Again, we have central, state and local governments. Local governments are, for instance, communities. State governments are different islands have separate governments, for instance, or regions have their own governments in some countries, and these are the state governments, and the central government is responsible for the whole. In the central government there is typically the budgetary, the public budget is there located, or extra budgetary central government issues and social security. This is typically not at the community or regional level, so this is typically located in the central government. Further duties are military is not done by regional government, it's part of the central government, of course. The general government sectors and its subsectors, I already mentioned that we have the central, state and local subsectors. They are made of separate institutional units. Analytically useful, the group, according to administrative, legislative or funding arrangements. These are the criteria where we see how independent they are, or is the central government, or is the state government, yes. So the budgetary is a good criterion. And the groupings depend also on several circumstances. But it's important that all units and subsectors are covered, not whether budgetary or extra budgetary. They should be included into the general government. This is important. There's nothing missing. Whether it's not in the correct box, it's okay, but it should be included in general government. Every country has a budgetary central government. This is typically. If this is a country, it has not. This is not a country. There exists no country without its own central budget. It's often a single unit of the central government that encompasses the fundamental activities of the national executive, legislative, and judiciary powers. Yes, this is also typical characteristic that they have executive powers to enforce laws, for instance, to have their own legislation, and to have juridical powers. State and local governments also have their budgetary and local government budgets, but they typically do not have legislative or juridical power. The general government, general entities have individual budgets not fully covered by the general budget, are considered extra budgetary. Operated under authority control of central, state or local government, typically have own revenues supplemented by grants. So an extra budgetary is not really the budget of the general government. Nevertheless, it belongs to the government because it's controlled. It's funded sometimes by part of the government, by taxes, but sometimes also by transfers and grants coming from other countries. There is, for instance, a development fund in one country which is funded by donor countries, but it's nevertheless part of the general government. It should be located in anyone. It's not private households. It's not a non-profit institution, service household in most cases. It's not a corporation, so it's part of the government. And which part? Typically it's located in the general budget, so it should be, even if it's not funded by taxes, it should be sorted as a general government institution, central government maybe. Discretion, and it can decide over volume and composition of spending. Central government consists of the institutional units of the central government plus those non-market, non-profit institutions that are controlled. So if we have non-market institutions serving households, so in extraordinary things, but they are controlled by the central government, then we should sort this to the central government. If this is regionally controlled, we put it to the local government. And if it is on a state government, for regional, we put it there. So this is only who has the power to control this, we give it to the position either central or local or state government. What is political responsibility concerning this? National defense, maintenance of law and order, relations with foreign governments, legislation and regulation of social and economic systems is typical central. So the general government, part of this is central, and all these duties are typically central. There is no national defense on the state or local. So also what is the budgetary of these things has to be sorted to this way. There's generally a compromise between budgetary central government, extra budgetary central government and social security funds. This can be located outside the central government, but it should in all cases be part of the general government. Whether it's in local or so, it's not so important, but it's important that it is in general government. The general government subsectors consist of state, provincial and regional governments, which I already mentioned. They are separate institutional units plus those non-market producing institutions that are controlled by them. We can continue a little bit in the slides. A state government has to meet the definition of an institutional unit. It is important that we have this as an institutional unit. What is this? Has his own power, has his own budget, and then we can say this is their own regional institution. If this has no own budget and cannot decide, this is part of the central. So if there is an agency located on an island, it is not automatically that it's a regional government part. It can still be the central of the central, because it has no own budget, for instance. We do not have data for sorting out, and has no own power to decide on its own budget. Yes. Then, even it is located on an island, on a certain region, it is part of the central government. Let's come now to government revenues. We know now what is central government, what is the sector. The definition 1711 asks the revenues of the central government. Central government, I think we know now quite clearly what are the revenues of a government. We will talk about the definition of revenue here. The time of recording and measurement is important, whether this belongs to this fiscal year or to the other, because payment is not always the good criteria to put in one or another year. The main types of revenue, characteristic of revenue transactions, the principles of recording, and some classifications. So the general definition of revenue is an increase in net worth resulting from a transaction. This is a rather elusive expression, so we have to go a little bit more into details to understand this. So any transaction with no impact and no net worth, such as the sale of non-financial assets, should not be recorded as revenue. Take, for instance, a government sells some sites, some premises, and gets money. It does not change the net worth. It had less premises, less land, and more money. This is not revenue because it's just changing of the aggregate. Yes, this is not really a revenue because you have less worth of this and more worth of cash. This is not part of revenue. So only if you change financial assets, if the government has stocks, for instance, or government bonds of another, then this is an asset, but a financial asset, but not with non-financial asset. However, in some cases, it's not straightforward to distinguish if a transaction is revenue or not. This is clear. Also, there are cases in which, being clear that the transaction is revenue, it is not easy to identify what type of revenue this is. We come to these different types later on. Let's go first a little bit to time of recording and measurement. What we want to have in national accounts or in our SDG definitions, we want to have these revenues on an accrual basis, not on a cash basis. Means if taxes or other revenues come in, the right boxes for which time period this was meant for. So if we get 1 year later income tax, we should nevertheless locate this money in the year before, because there the debt accrued to pay this. Yes, so the timing of the cash revenue is not the correct one. We have to look in which period belongs which payment. Yes, taxes and social contributions should only record amounts that are realistically expected to be collected, evidenced by assessments, declaration, customs declaration. These are the relevant facts. If collection is unlikely, it should not be recorded. So, if there comes later less cash on, this does not decrease only the money in this cash year, but also in the accrual year. We should, if I explained, it depends on the tax declaration. If the tax declaration says 100,000, you have to pay 100,000, and next year come only 90,000, what to do? Not look at the cash, 90,000? Look only at the thing? No. We have to record the 90,000 in the year before in the accrual basis. That is how it should be done. What are taxes? Taxes are compulsory, unrequited amounts receivable by government units from institutional units. So from institutional units means from corporation, from private households, from other governments can this be, yes. They are compulsory, you have to pay this. If you do not pay this, there can be a lawsuit, this is illegal, and unrequited. You pay this and you do not get a direct service for this. You pay this and cannot go to the government, look, I paid this, now I want to have more security. This is not possible, these are unrequited funds. They come in a box and they are dedicated to finance all overall function of the government, but the individual has no right to receive something for this. Yes, you can go to the next election, you can vote against the government, but you do not have a direct right to get something for your taxes. It excludes certain compulsory receivables such as fines. Fines are also compulsory if you drive too fast. So no fines, no penalties, and social security contributions are also not. You are obliged to pay this, but there you get some service. But for a speed ticket you are obliged to pay, but you do not get a service. So you can say, well, maybe it's a kind of tax, it's not. There is a certain definition what are fines and penalties. They should not be included in taxes. Yes? Social contributions are compulsory, but requited funds. So you will later on, when you're retired, get some service and you have to write. And also some health service. If you pay in social contributions for health service, there are rules. What do you get for this? And then you get to go to a hospital and then you get a free treatment, for instance. And you can sue the hospital if you do not get this, because you pay this. So these funds are required. What are grants? There are further types of revenue. These are voluntary unrequited transfers. Transfers receivable by government units from other residents or non-resident government units or international organizations. So this is like some free money, some donations from international funds for development or something. These are grants. Then we have also property income. Revenue receivable in return for putting financial assets and natural resources at the disposal of other units. Interest, dividends, or rents are, for instance. Yes, the government has a large fund and they get dividends for this. If they have savings, they get interest for it. Or if the government owns a buildings and rents this, then this is a property income. It's not a tax, it's not a fine, but it's a government revenue. Then government makes also revenue by sales of goods and services. Some things they sell, for instance, water or electricity or something. Or vaccination can be also. Or school fees. These are also sales of goods and services. There are such exchanges, such as sales by market establishment, administrative fees charged for services, incidental sales by non-market establishment, and imputed sales. We'll later discuss again what is the difference between fees and taxes, and we record the gross value of this. We do not make it net, we record this as gross values. So then we have other types of revenues: fines, penalties and forfeits, transfer not elsewhere classified, premiums, fees and claims related to non-life insurers and standardized guarantee schemes. So these are all different types. Let's come a little bit closer to the most important, to the taxes. When activities giving rise to claim take place, you have to record this when they give rise to claim. So we talk about the recording time, the correct recording time for taxes. It's done on the basis of tax assessment and declaration, not on payments, as I already pronounced. Unpaid taxes should be cancelled or written off. Recorded gross of collection costs or of retained amounts. So if you get later a deduction, you record this gross, that you have it two times. One you record it as a revenue and then you give back. So do not net this out in the calculation. And only government can raise taxes, yes? So if they sell vaccination or education fees, this is not a tax, because this is not government, this is a school, for instance. We have here some classification of different kinds of taxes. I do not want to explain, just short mention. There are taxes on income, profits and capital gains. There are taxes on payroll and workforce, taxes on property, taxes on goods and services, like for alcohol or tobacco taxes, all these excise taxes, taxes on international trade and transactions, these are import taxes, for instance, and 116, as you can see in the slide, the box for other taxes. Social contributions, when do we have to record this? They are receivable by social insurance schemes to make provision of social insurance benefits. They come either from employers, there are also employer contributions in some countries to the social security funds, or come from employees. Or sometimes self-employed, like farmers, have also to contribute, then they get later on a pension or now a social security, they're covered by the health system, and can also be by non-employed persons if they pay deliberately their contributions. They are levied in most cases a function of earnings of the payroll, yes? The employer and the employee contribution, the more they earn, the more they have to contribute, or sometimes also in the number of employees in some countries. There are compulsory levies assessed on a different tax basis, which are not social security. There are also some taxes on the payroll, but these do not contribute to social securities. So here we have a graph about how the relation between private households and the general government is. Here we see that the employees get compensation from the general government and pay back social contribution. Do not net this out, please. Do not say the compensation is because this goes anyway. It's also social security is part of general government, so I can net this out. I say the net compensation of employees is lower, should not be done. They should get the gross, and later on there is a payment back to the social security, which is part of the general government. Social contribution, how they are classified, they are also different. The social security contributions and other social contributions, which is not so important, I think there are employer contributions I already mentioned. Let's go a little bit more into detail for grants. Here are some principles for recording. There are cash grants and income in kind grants. Sometimes international organization donates a school and they bring in the bricks and the employees, so there is no cash here. So these are called in-kind grants. They are not recorded on a cash basis, but nevertheless they have to be recorded. They are valued at current market prices, or if not available, use donor valuation, how much the donor thinks they pay for this. They have to budget this, so they should know how much this is worth. And this has no impact on net lending on borrowing of the, so it does not increase the debt of a government because this is free. We have current transfers or capital. Current are receivable for purpose of supporting expenses, which are more regularly, and capital are linked to acquisition of assets or repayment of liabilities. This is, for instance, constructing a school, for instance, or a hospital. Some countries get a whole hospital financed, or some cars, police cars. Sometimes these are more capital purpose, and they have to be recorded. You have to look, or the government finance statistician have to record this. As I already mentioned, the government gets also, the general government also property income. Sometimes the government has owned houses, yes, and they rent it, or they rent it to enterprises. So this is also income, but it's neither a tax nor a transfer nor a social contribution. So there we have different kind of property incomes. One of properties which is wealth. If the government has money at the bank, they earn dividends, they earn interest. If they own stocks, for instance, they earn dividends. Or sometimes they get also rents if they earn a government building and rent it to some institutions. Please take care, or the government finance statistics should care. In some countries, the civil servants get the rents in the apartment at a cheaper price than the market. Then you have to record, nevertheless, higher money they get, because they get less compensation of employees, lower wages, but they get the government building apartment for free. You should record it, nevertheless, a higher wage, and then they pay back implicitly, so there is no cash, but nevertheless, this is the income of the government. Income should be higher and wage payment should be covered. So do not net this out. And also reinvest this earning of FDI, rents, I already talked about this. Then we have other revenues, sales of goods and services, please record this. Gross, without deducting expenses. They can be related to sales of market establishments, for instance, sales of non-market establishments like fee or incidental sales, or being imputed sales, wages and salaries in kind, for instance. Yes, if they have a public beer brewery and they get beer for free, this is also a kind of salary in kind. This is a kind of selling beer. You have to put an income for the government, but you have to put it you have to increase for the same amount, the wage payment. Fines, penalties and forfeits, compulsory transfers imposed by courts or quasi-juridical bodies for violations of laws or administrative rules. So that's the difference between a tax. You have to go to a law body, to a jurisdictional body, and you have to pay this for a violation of laws and not for a regular. You have to pay taxes without that you violate the law. But fines, you violated the law. That's the difference between taxes. And then forfeits were deposited in advance, so have to be sorted out. And yes, when related to taxes, should be separated where possible. Other revenue, there are also subsidies in this box of other revenues associated with production activity, belongs mostly to public corporation, which have to pay this, and other transfers voluntary other than grants or current. But these are typically smaller issues, and premiums also. So to sum it up, we have revenues, transaction which increase the net worth. We have the government. We know the government sector. That's what is the general government, that it consists of central government, state government and local governments. This we know. And we have the money they get, the revenue. Now we have the two most ingredients for compiling the SDG goal 17.1.1, which means total government revenue as a proportion of GDP by source. And we also recorded the sources. What comes from taxes, what comes from grants, what comes from fines and so on. So we have all ingredients to have this. Let's now come to the last definitions. I added here for you some government finance statistics definitions that you can find better your way along in the government finance statistics database you get maybe, and then you have to compile it from there. Here we have some definitions. What's the cash balance, what is a net operating balance and so on. This can be helpful when looking around at these indicators, but stay to the definitions of taxes and grants which I gave you here. These are the official definitions and they should be used in government finance statistics from where you can extract the data in order to compile these SDG goals. Let's come to now the last SDG indicator. So the second is also clear, proportion of domestic budget funded by domestic taxes. Now we only look at the taxes, not at total revenue, like with SDG 17.1.1. We ask for the total government revenue. Now we are not interested in total revenue, we only at the taxes, a part of total revenue. And we look how high it is of total budget. Total budget is domestic budget, you know now from the general governments, the budgets, and you calculate this as a proportion of this. Then you have SDG indicator 17.1.2. This can be made exactly how I showed you with these definitions. Look at only the taxes and look at the budget. The budget gives them from the general government, yes, so including social security, for instance, yes. The general government covers central government, state government, and local governments, and the social security take their budgets together and compile the total taxes as a percentage of this. And then you have SDG indicator 17.1.2. The last missing SDG indicator is 17.3.2, volumes of remittances in US dollars as a proportion of total GDP. Again, I do not explain what is GDP. I concentrate only on personal remittances. What are the remittances? Personal, the definition of remittances are personal remittances comprise of personal transfers and compensation of employees. So two components. Compensation of employees means that if a person works in another countries and sends back the money to home countries, this is a personal remittance. For some smaller countries, this can be quite a large sum compared to GDP, for instance. They produce not a lot at home, but many of their citizens go to other countries, work there and send money. So this is income for this country, but it's not covered by GDP. GDP is only the production in this country. They produce GDP of other countries. They contribute. That is why they get a compensation of employees and send it back home. And personal transfers for a Christmas gift, for instance, sending home money. This is also a personal transfer, or for birthday money for the niece, for instance. This is also income of the country. Personal transfers consist of all current transfers in cash or in kind, made or received by resident households to or from non-resident households. This is not now a tax payment from other countries to the home country, yes. So if the person working in another country have to pay part of the money he or she earns there to the government as a tax, this is not covered in these remittances. This is not remittance. Remittance goes from private households to other private households. Yes, only private household things. Can be in cash or in kind. If you send a TV set to your niece for birthday, this should be also recorded as a income, as a transfer in kind. Personal transfers does include all current transfers between resident and non-resident individuals. Compensation of employees refers to the income of border, seasonal and other short-term workers who are employed in an economy where they are not resident, and of residents employed by non-resident entities. Means, if this person works permanently in another country and sends money, yes, this is not really a mention. This is also remittance, but not compensation of employees. Yes, if this is a seasonal worker, you take the whole money and put it at the national income of your country. That this is compensation of employees. So part of this remittance is compensation of employees. This is only if the person works permanently outside the country. And another part is this other remittances. This is for seasonal work. So both are remittances, but there are two different boxes where they can belong. This is not so important for you. As long as they are included in remittances, this is correct, but it would be good if it would be in the correct box, because you find in the balance of payments where you do not have to calculate this for your own. You go to the balance of payment of your country and add the right boxes. Yes, there, the right sums there, in order to find, look, compensation coming from other countries, you find this, but then you have to add these other remittances, these other transfers, and then with this both you can put this in a proportion to GDP, and that is SDG indicator 1732. Data are the sum of two items defined in the 6th edition of the IMF's balance of payment. I already mentioned this. Personal transfers. So this is the money for seasonal workers, for instance. This is more or less a gift. And compensation of employees. You will find both in this balance of payments. And with this SDG indicator goes 1732. We are at the end of the presentations. I hope everything was clear. The intention was more that you do not have to compile this separately, but you take either government finance statistics data, you can find this readily for most of the countries, and take out the right sums, the right boxes of this. The names are standardized, I give in the presentation. You can read in the slides again that you do not take the wrong ones. Yes, and also in the balance of payment. There are two sources, government finance statistics, which are necessary to compile SDG indicator 1711 and 1712. And for 1732, you have to go to balance of payments and add, please, these correct positions and put it into proportion to GDP, nominal GDP, of course. You will find this at your statistics office, and I hope then you can compile readily these three indicators. Thank you.